How do you hope the war ends in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I do hope it ends, with a ceasefire and a negotiated solution, but it has to be with Russia compromising on something. And that's not where we are right now.
Do you think both sides might be willing to compromise?
Most wars always end in that way. I mean, nobody's ever happy.
But they don't seem to, either side, like, legitimately doesn't want to compromise right now.
Yeah, because look, the thing is that for Ukraine right now, anything is a compromise at its expense, right?
Yeah.
Vast devastation, unbelievable casualty rates, biggest refugee crisis since World War II. Russia's just said, sorry, this is our territory, it's not just Crimea. I think there could have been a negotiation over that. But, Donetsk and Luhansk, I mean, we've got all kinds of formulas we've had all the way through history of, putting things under a kind of guardianship, receivership of territory, the United Nations, all kinds of different ways of formulating that. We could have easily been creative. But Russia's basically saying, nope, sorry, we've taken this. And any negotiation is just you recognizing this for us not doing more destruction. I mean, that is not the basis for a negotiation. And, having, kind of people come and just sort of laying those terms down is not a starting position. I think Russia is also, in a dilemma of its own making now, because Putin has made it very difficult, to compromise just by everything that he said. Now, for Ukraine, they've already won a great moral, political and military victory. It's just hard to see it, right, at the particular moment. They've done what the Finns did in the Winter War, which the Finns were devastated by the Winter War as well, but they pushed them back. Now, the Finns lost a lot of territory. They lost Karelia and, huge swathes of territory, but they got to be Finland. And now they're, joining NATO, but they've been part of the EU. The question is how to, get Ukraine to be Ukraine in a success.
Yes.
But, and that's the challenge. Now, they've already won psychologically, politically, militarily, because Putin hasn't succeeded in what he wanted to do, but he has succeeded in completely and utterly devastating them. And this is the kind of the old Muscovite, old Russian imperial, old Soviet mentality, going all the way back to when the Muscovites were the bagmen for the, the horde, for the Mongols. It was destruction. You don't play with us, we'll destroy you. People talk about it as mafia, but it's older. All you have to go down is go and see Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev. I mean, I remember, seeing that film when I was first as a student in Moscow and just being, whoa, this is so brutal. I mean, this is just unremittingly brutal, because the whole point is that you show people who's the boss. The destruction is the point of things as well, because, you are emphasizing your domination. And that's what Putin is doing right now, is saying, okay, you want to go in a different direction, so be it, but I'm going to make you suffer. Remember when Hodorkovsky got out of the penal colony, when Putin let him out eventually? Mm-hmm. He said he's suffered enough. But he suffered for 10, 11 years. I don't think Putin feels that Ukraine has suffered enough at this point, or we have suffered enough.
So there's a part of this invasion that's punishment for something.
Yeah, it's medieval. I mean, look, we're all capable of the same things, right? There was all that destruction that's what Assad was like in Syria, like his father. You destroy because you teach them a lesson. And look, Britain did that in the colonial era. I mean, all the history of British colonialism is exactly the same. I mean, all the Mau Mau, in Kenya, up until recent times, brutality. Teaching people, teaching them a lesson. You have to suffer. The US did it. I mean, we did it with the Native Americans, we did it all over the place, as well. This is kind of what big, states do at different points in history. It's just that, Russia has not moved on from that. I mean, we've learned some lessons late. I hope, we've fully internalized them of, things that we've done, kind of the past United States. We ideally are trying to do better, and most of Europe's trying to do better as well. Think about France and Algeria. Again, we can see this in many different settings. But I think, for Putin right now, he hasn't taught all of us sufficient a lesson.
I talked to hundreds of people in Ukraine, and the tough thing, the inspiring thing is that there's a unity. The tough thing is a lot of them speak intensely of hate towards not just Russia, but Russians. Russians.
That's how Europeans felt about Germany and Germans at the end of World War II.
And generational hate. Like,
Well,
I don't think that hate is gonna pass.
Well, it might well take a generation. I mean, when I was a kid in the 70s, I went on exchanges to Germany, and that was like 30 years, more than 30 years after the end of the war. My grandfather, who'd fought in World War One, wouldn't speak to my parents when they sent me on a. Then we hadn't fought in World War Two. We fought in World War One. He hated the Germans, and he did not want me going, to Germany as an exchange student. He refused to meet, kind of the German kid who, came to stay at my house, for example. I mean, it takes a long time to get over that. But you do, I mean, and we have in Europe. And that was the whole point of, all of that kind of exercise of European unity after World War II. Now, the big challenge is, what do we do with Russia? Because a lot of people are talking now, we can't have European security without Russia. Other people are saying we can't have a Europe, kind of with Russia. So how do we deal with this? We've got to basically it's going to be like Japan and Germany after World War II, after this. Just the level of the atrocities that have been carried out. As you said, the level of hatred. But we found a way of doing it. Now, a lot of it will require change on the part of Russia as well, and Russians, and really thinking about this. I mean, Gorbachev before tried to deal in the late 1980s with the black spots with glasnost, with openness and talking about Russian history, just kind of never sort of withered on the vine as time went on.
What gives you hope about the future?
Well, my hope comes into the fact that we've done things before, that we've got ourselves out of tough times and we've overcome stuff, and in people, because I meet amazing people. You just talked about hundreds of people that you've met with in Ukraine. And, people all think differently. Contexts and circumstances change, and people can evolve. Some people get stuck. Putin's got stuck, but people can evolve. And, I do think that if we all pull together, and we've seen this in so many contexts, we can find solutions to things. Just like we get back again to our discussion about scientists and just the kind of amazing breakthroughs of, what we did on COVID or done on, kind of other, diseases and things. And look, there is some similarities. There's a pathology around war and conflict. Years ago in the 1990s, I worked on, a lot of projects that were funded by the Carnegie Corporation of the United States under the then presidency of David Hamburg, who was a scientist, and actually did see a lot of parallels between the sort of like the pathology of disease and, kind of the pestilence, conflict kind of idea. And of course, these, parallels had to be very careful because, they're not neat. But there was kind of like an idea in there. And how do you sort of treat this? How do you deal with this? And we did come up with all kinds of ideas and, things that are still out there. We've created institutions that have helped to keep the peace. We just have neglected them, allowed them to degrade, just like the United Nations. And, we've created problems inside of them, like the veto power of the permanent powers on the UN Security Council. But we can change that. You're just going to have a will. And I do think out there are sufficient people with a will. And we've just got to get people mobilized. I mean, I'm always amazed by how people can mobilize themselves around a crisis. Remember Winston Churchill, I don't quote all the time because I can never remember half his quotes, but I do remember the one about never let a good crisis go to waste. And I always think that we shouldn't let this crisis go to waste. And something else can come out of this. Just like in Ukraine, look, we worried before about corruption in Ukraine, the influence of the oligarchs. We've got our own oligarchs here in the US we need to, deal with as well. But this is a chance to do it differently. Yeah, it really is a chance to do things differently.
And a part of that is young people. I have to ask you.
It is young people. I mean, I'm feeling a bit on the older side now, but I still feel I've got, a bit of, kind of youth within me yet. At 57, I'm not that old, but I'm not that young. But we have to work together with younger and older people. You've got to work together in coalitions of, across generations.
You remind me of kids who just graduated college and say, and I feel old. So yeah, no.
I don't actually feel old, but it is a number, age, and when you kind of think about when I was.
I thought you don't like math.
Yeah, I know. It's like things like that. Yeah, but I find it interesting. But I remember when I was a little kid, I kept thinking about the year 2000, and I thought, oh my God, I'll be dead. I'll be 35.
Yeah,
that's 22 years ago.